Discussion about New York City. There is no discussion about gun violence in New York City without discussing the iron pipeline that is Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and honorary mention to Ohio, where 70% of likely illegal trafficked guns found in New York City come from. There's no discussion about gun violence in Chicago without talking about Indiana.
To my amazement, you know what I discovered, Madam Chair? You know what these houses did not have? That were built 100 years ago in cities in America. You know what they did not have, Commissioner? Locks. Locks. Now I ask you all, what happened to that country, man? A country where homes were built in cities with no locks. A country where guns were everywhere and virtually not regulated at all. We didn't have mass shootings, Madam Chair. I yield my speech, but I will not yield my opposition to these unconstitutional laws.
They tell you gun violence is caused by too many guns. They tell you that freedom itself is the problem. And once again, they're pointing the finger everywhere except where it actually belongs. During this hearing, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez rolled out the same talking points we've been hearing for years, the so-called iron pipeline, blaming red states, blaming culture, blaming history. But then Clay Higgins stepped in and did something Democrats absolutely hate. He brought facts, he brought history, and he completely challenged the narrative. Stick around, because this exchange isn't just about guns. It's about how a country can decline without even realizing it.
I move on. For context, the NRA spent about $250 million in 2020 alone. That's more than twice the entire salary of Congress combined. In 1 year, lobbying against gun safety laws. There's also this discussion about anything but a gun, but that these are about violent people. But yet we aren't doing anything about addressing the actual root causes of misogyny, where 2/3 of mass shootings are connected to domestic violence, or the emergence of white supremacy radicalization, mass incarceration, and poverty, and the connections between that and mass shootings in our communities. I yield my time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'm gonna bring us back in time to World War II. America's population, 140 million. 15 million American men came home from World War II with deep scars, insignificant skills. They bore the invisible wounds of war. And there was weapons everywhere. We'll talk about mental challenge. My father was one of those men who was a Navy pilot in World War II. He came back from the war and built his family. I'm the 7th of his 8 children. I was born in 1961. We had guns everywhere. There was virtually no regulation. Any child in the 50s could buy a weapon from any seller if Daddy sent them with the money. We didn't have mass shootings. It wasn't until 1968 in America that serial numbers were even required on weapons sold in this country. You order weapons through the Sears catalog by the mail. In the 70s, I attended a high school, large rural school. Virtually every vehicle in the parking lot was a pickup truck, and almost every one had a rifle or a shotgun on the back glass and a pistol under the seat. We didn't have school shootings. 1979, I began college. One of the jobs I had to work my way through college was as a carpenter. We restored historical buildings. We had to determine in the process of that work what was the original cuts of these homes, residential homes built 75, 85, 100 years ago. You could tell by the saw cut if it was a mechanical cut, an electric cut, or a hand cut. By such observations, we knew exactly how that house was originally built. And to my amazement as a young man, beginning college in Louisiana, working, to my amazement, you know what I discovered, Madam Chair? You know what these houses did not have? that were built 100 years ago in cities in America, you know what they did not have, Commissioner? Locks. Locks. Now I ask you all, what happened to that country, man? A country where homes were built in cities with no locks. A country where guns were everywhere and virtually not regulated at all. Where millions of Americans, 14 million Americans came back. It's 11% of the population at the time after World War II with incredible skills of war and weapons of war, as you called them, everywhere. But we didn't have mass shootings. And here we sit today where an entire once proud Democratic Party is presenting unbelievably unconstitutional laws to press upon our nation, and we have a police commissioner that says he would go home to home and confiscate legally owned weapons if he got a tip. Madam Chair, I yield my speech, but I will not yield my opposition to these unconstitutional laws.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's argument was familiar. She blamed gun violence in cities like New York and Chicago on firearms coming from states with looser gun laws. She tied mass shootings to domestic violence, poverty, radicalization, and systemic failure, and framed the Second Amendment as an obstacle to safety. It sounds compassionate. It sounds complex. But it overlooks one key point. America has already lived through a time with more guns, fewer regulations, and far less fear. Clay Higgins reminded the room of post-World War II America, a country where more than 10% of the population were trained combat veterans. Firearms were common. Regulations were minimal. Kids could order rifles through catalogs. High school parking lots often had trucks with firearms inside. And yet, there were no widespread school lockdowns, no culture of constant fear, and far fewer mass shooting incidents. Higgins went further. He spoke about restoring century-old homes and discovering something that feels almost impossible today: houses built without locks. Not because people were careless, but because communities operated with stronger social order, accountability, and shared responsibility. So what changed? According to his argument, it wasn't the guns. It wasn't the Constitution. It was governance and societal structure. He pointed to New York City in the 1990s, where stricter enforcement and policy changes led to a dramatic drop in crime. But over time, as enforcement weakened and policies shifted, crime rates began to rise again. Today, critics argue that politicians often blame objects while avoiding deeper issues like criminal behavior, social breakdown, and institutional challenges. Illegal gun trafficking is acknowledged, but enforcement is debated. Emotional arguments are used, but practical solutions remain contested. This isn't just a debate about guns, it's a broader discussion about society, responsibility, and governance. A country doesn't decline overnight. It changes gradually when standards weaken, when responsibility is shifted away, and when institutions lose public trust. Clay Higgins wasn't just defending the Second Amendment. He was raising a larger question. What kind of society are we choosing to build? Because when fear replaces freedom and excuses replace accountability, the long-term consequences can be significant. If you want real change, some argue it starts at the local level in communities, schools, and elections that directly shape everyday life. That's the debate. And that's why this moment stood out. Let me know what you think in the comments. If this breakdown helped you see the issue more clearly, hit like, subscribe, and stay informed. I'll catch you in the next one.